Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School Pregame Show. My name is Andrew Claudio, a.k.a. GMAC. It is time to preview another Knicks matchup, this time on Sunday night against the Orlando Magic. The two losers in the NBA Cup face off down in the Magic Kingdom. Two teams that are currently separated by one game overall, tied in the loss column. One team is 17-10, one team is 15-10. So technically, with the win, the Knicks could pull into a tied for third in the Eastern Conference if you care about standings and records at this point in the season. And yet, the vibes around both teams couldn't be more different, but also could be more the same in that the Knicks have had some injuries to their bench, but have just gotten healthier as the season has gone along. Yet the fan base, as we all know, has felt the highs and the lows of this roller coaster emotional season so far. The burden of expectations, as they call it. And then there's this Magic team that every time you see them, they impress you a little bit more. Paolo gets off to this great start. Then he goes down. Then Franz takes over, and he looks even more amazing, headed for an all-star appearance. And then, unfortunately, he goes down. And then their first game since losing both of them, Jalen Suggs looks ready to take the torch and run with more high usage and a bigger role. This is going to be a bit of a therapy session today, folks, because these are two teams that probably need an outsider's perspective on how things are really going. And joining me to give that outsider's perspective, my good friend from the Magic Kingdom. Unfortunately, New York, we let him get away. He is a Giants fan and a Yankees fan, but he's also the host of the Sixth Man Show, the official Orlando Magic podcast down in Orlando. Jonathan Osborne, welcome back to the Knicks Film School Podcast, sir.
Well, tonight it is Jonathan Osborne.
Jonathan Osborne,
we'll talk a little bit about, the crosstown move from one Juan Soto, which I know you've been very classy. You're not going to rub it in too much.
To you, I've been very classy. There are Yankee fans here that are like, what are you talking about, Jonathan? He has not been classy. I will just say this. You're finally talking to me again, which is a good thing. I don't ever feel bad about trash talk, or most of the time I don't feel bad about trash talk when it comes to like sports. Like if I said something personal and stepped over a line, I'll apologize. If it's just sports, like I don't care. And when it's a direct shot when your team takes an all-star and future Hall of Famer from another team that has fans that have reminded you that the number 27 exists your entire life. So it was like a victory lap. Of course, that was taken. And then I got this reply from one Jonathan Osborne on Sunday. I'm going to have to mute you. I'm gutted. And I was like, okay, like, do what you got to do. I get it. And then the rest of the week, I was very like, he's a New York Met. I'm excited. During the press conference, said nothing about the Yankees. My mentions were filled with Yankee fans saying like he's lost his aura, never going to win anything. He's fat now, like all of the above. And it doesn't matter, changes the fact that Juan Soto's a New York Met and he's going to be a Met for the 15 years. And I am very excited about that. So thank you for the well wishes. And thank you for joining me, despite the fact that he's no longer a New York Yankee.
Yeah, I think everyone is like well within reason for their reaction, right? Like I'm obviously very disappointed. You're very obviously and deservedly excited and are taking your victory lap, right? Mm-hmm. I know tons of Yankees fans, in my life that are what about the 27 rings and so on and so forth. I don't really like to do that because almost all of those happened, before my lifetime, and the Yankees haven't won anything of, real significance in, over a decade plus, when like winning is the standard and the expectation. So I think you're well within your reason to take your victory lap. And then I also think that I'm well within reason to mute you, at least for a little bit, which I'm not actually going to. But, because
I would have. Trust me, I would have. I were you, I would have. I was like, oh, okay, no. I understand.
Fair enough. But no, I still, like I told you, you in my life, obviously. And then, one of my good friends from high school is a Mets fan. So I really am happy for you all. And I've sort of reached this stage of grief, I guess you would say, where I'm just coping that like, oh, this is the best. It was so much money. Look at these other moves that we're making. Mm-hmm. I'm really excited about, some of the moves that we're making here in the off season. So I'm definitely coping pretty hard these days, but yeah, I'm happy for you. And I hope it works out like really well. I hope you guys don't win it all with him, because it would just add insult to injury. But yeah, I mean, we were games away from having a New York World Series, and that might be in the cards moving forward. At least I hope so.
Listen, the Mets have the Dodgers in their way. So if they are able to get by the Dodgers to get to the World Series, we'll have done our part. And the Yankees are in the old LeBron version of the Eastern Conference, where he just had like a hop, skip, and a jump. It's like, all right, I'm back in the finals this year, folks, regardless of whether I'm in Miami or Cleveland. I have a front row, a direct path back to the championship each year.
Can we do something about this deferred money, by the way?
The Mets didn't, by the way. The Mets don't have the deferred money. Steve Cohen writes his check. He means it. The Dodgers are putting players on layaway. That's a whole different thing out west that the MLB needs to step in. I say this and I mean it. When I make fun of Yankee fans, the fact that Juan Soto's no longer a Yankee, now he's a New York Met for the next 15 years. I don't mean it at you. How's that? You are not one of the Yankee fans I directed at. Okay?
I will still take it personally, but I will take it slightly less personally, knowing that you don't mean it to me, but it will still hurt nonetheless. But I appreciate you being a class act as always.
Yes. And to Benji Ritholtz, who listens to these pregame pods, I'm not that sorry, Benji. I will say this. I was very nice to Benji. I avoided the man for a week because I've learned we could talk basketball all day. He'll always be really cordial and polite. Benji has to bring it up first. And he did during our film session yesterday, which all of you can watch now on the Knicks Film School YouTube channel. And I was like, all right, you brought up the Yankees got a closer. I think it's a good move. That's all I'm going to say. Let's get back to basketball. Speaking of getting back to basketball, our teams, Jonathan, are in very similar spots in the standings. And yet the vibes, as I said in the intro, could not be more different because, or at least maybe that's where we should go first, the state of the Magic at the moment, because look, I came on your show before the season and I said I'm not afraid of the Orlando Magic, and I tell you, a very healthy Magic team I think could not just do away with the Knicks, but could probably make a good run at the Celtics if they could start hitting some threes. But what you saw from Paolo before he got hurt, what you saw from Franz before he got hurt, that was the making of a budding contender if they can, start to build around these two young studs. And unfortunately, we're not going to see them on Sunday because of the two injuries. So just, if you could take me inside the fan base for a second, how are the vibes? Is it gloom and doom because Paolo and Franz went down? Is it optimism because of what you saw when they were healthy, both together and separately? How are you guys feeling these days?
I would say you and I talked a little bit off air before we started recording that the Knicks season has kind of been an emotional roller coaster. And that is exactly how I would, what I would express about the Magic season with you get off to a great start. Paolo has the 50-point game. Everything feels awesome. Team's looking really well. And then Paolo, basically the next game, injures the oblique in that game. Then he's ruled out, obviously, for at least 4 to 6 weeks. We're coming right up on 6 weeks now, and doesn't seem like he's going to be back at that 6-week mark. We're probably still, I would guess 2 to 3 weeks out from Paolo coming back. And then the conversation immediately shifted to, hey, we gave Franz Wagner a max contract this offseason. A lot of people are saying that it's an overpay. He's not worth the money, so on and so forth. This is his opportunity to really step up and prove that he's not only worth that money, but that he's capable of being a true number 2 on a championship contender. And our opinion was, if Franz can't step up during this time, we really don't have a shot at winning games in any sort of meaningful way. And you'll really just be holding on for dear life and see just how far are you out of the 4th seed or the 5th seed by the time that Paolo comes back. But Franz, I think, took it to a level that even some of the most optimistic Magic and Franz Wagner fans weren't quite sure that he could get there. We were probably about 75, 80% sure that he could be really good and that he could carry the load, but he was better than I think even the loftiest expectations when Paolo went out. And then you feel you're in the midst of winning and you're still doing, a great job. It's, holding on to that 3 seed. And then about, a week ago, as we're recording this, we get the Shams bomb. I guess I don't even know what we're calling those officially yet, but that Franz Wagner has tore his oblique. And going back to, I think, the 2022 season, there's only been one oblique injury in the NBA before this year, and it was to Karl-Anthony. And now it happened to Paolo, and then basically
Back to
5
back.
weeks later, it happens to Franz, both of our franchise players. So the vibes at that point really hit a low. And the question was, well, how is the rest of this roster going to respond? And starting with that Phoenix game last week, it was just really apparent that these guys were going to come out and compete with a level of energy and focus that I think has been lacking at times this year. But every guy to a man realizing now that, hey, if we don't step up and everyone do our job and we're all pulling in the same direction and staying connected as a team, we're going to have no chance to win these games. Now it's only been a couple of games, but the sort of early signs after that have been somewhat optimistic, with Jalen Suggs being able to step up. How much of that is sustainable and how much of that is he going to be able to do? And how are we going to be able to compete with some of the better teams in the league? That is really still up for discussion, because when a guy or multiple guys like this go out, there's always like the initial emotional response. Like everybody tries to step up, everybody tries to do their part. But how long is that going to last, I think, for us is really the big question right now. So I would say we're mildly optimistic, but probably a couple of really tough consecutive wins away from feeling like the sky is falling. But that's the NBA season, right?
So, yes, that's the NBA season. But I guess my curiosity, and like the Knicks went through this last year when Randall went down, and then Anunoby just had this like mysterious elbow injury. And there was almost this feeling throughout the last 2.5 months, 3 months of the season that let's just like hold the fort. And then when our guys come back, we'll see that team from January again. The Knicks went. Sorry, what's on my mind.
It's all right. It's all right.
The Knicks in January last year, after making the Anunoby trade, went 12-2 and looked like world beaters. And like they just had this insane week where they beat Brooklyn and kind of extinguished that thing from what people thought it was for a while. Then they beat Denver at home and they ran them off the floor. Then they beat Miami, and that's when Randall got hurt, and then OG went down before the next game too. And it really felt like there's nothing really to learn over the next 2.5 months. It's just wait until we get our guys back. And so, like you had said, when Paolo went down, you wanted to see what Franz can do, and now Franz goes down. And I guess my question is, like, what do you want to learn over the next however long until one of those two guys comes back? Like, is it to see what Suggs can do with more responsibilities, or anybody else you want to see what they look like when they step up? Like, what do you want to see?
Yeah, I think that's really it. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's Jalen Suggs, right? He was drafted number 5 overall back in 2021. And draft night, we were like, this is the franchise savior, right? Because going into that draft, like a lot of mocks had him in the top 4. And then Toronto goes Scotty Barnes at 4. Suggs is there for us at 5. But he looked great in Summer League, but it came pretty apparent early on in his rookie year that maybe this wasn't like this, heir apparent to, the Magic throne, and maybe he wasn't going to be able to be necessarily the savior of the franchise. And funny enough, the Orlando Magic Pod Squad, which is the podcast that like the FanDuel Sports broadcast team puts together every so often, they released an episode earlier this evening as we're recording this on Friday with Jalen Suggs, and he had to talk about how, like, I came into the league and everywhere that I had been before in high school at Gonzaga, I was the guy, and I got drafted thinking I was going to be the guy. And then after a while, like, you realize that, okay, maybe that's not going to be my role in the league. And he had to learn how to, be like just the defensive menace that he's become, and how to be a complementary piece offensively. And especially as like Franz has taken steps forward and Paolo has taken steps forward, Jalen a lot of times has become like that third guy. But yeah, what we want to learn during this time is like, is Jalen capable of being the guy for stretches, right? Like last year, in the Cleveland series, if, Paolo's getting doubled and triple teamed and Franz Wagner is having a tough game 7 like he had, can we let Jalen basically run the show for like a 4 or 5 minute stretch offensively? And is he capable of doing that? And sort of what is that going to look like? But then other guys, right? Like we've been waiting for Karl-Anthony to find his rhythm all season long. Anthony Black has had some really good moments. Is he able to step up during this time and develop a little bit more? For me, it's more so about like guys having the confidence to be able to make plays without Paolo and Franz. because for most of this season and most of last year, if those guys weren't making things happen, nothing was happening whatsoever. So if a guy like a Jalen Suggs or an Anthony Black, or even a young guy like Jett Howard, who hasn't had a lot of opportunity the first couple of years in the league, now we're just down so many bodies. Not only are Paolo and Franz out, but Gary Harris has been missing time. Jonathan Isaac has been missing time. So guys like Jett Howard have been getting a little bit of run. And can those guys just sort of like find a way to play and a way to contribute on a pretty consistent basis? If we come away with those guys like finding this newfound level of confidence, and then we're able to add guys back in Paolo and Franz, I think we have a chance to be really dangerous in terms of, how high can we finish in the East, and then, potentially, making a run to the second round or maybe even the Eastern Conference Finals. Who knows? Still a lot of basketball to be played between now and then. But I think ultimately that's what I want to see and what I want to learn is what guys can step up and can they find this level of comfort to be able to play without those guys, or, step it up when those guys aren't having a great night.
So what's interesting is like best defense in the East through whatever 27 games for the Magic, and I don't expect that to drop. If anything, that's going to be their strength over the next however many weeks until one of them gets back. And I think that's what somewhat scares me for like as far as this matchup is concerned. And we'll talk about the game, but like that's if anything going to keep them alive over in the playoff race. And who knows who? I mean, this Atlanta thing has opened my eyes to think maybe that they should be taken more seriously than I took them the other night. That's for sure. But I mean, the shooting just continues to be glaring when you start to do some research on the Magic. And look, that was the game plan last Tuesday when the Knicks played the Magic. And I'm not even trying to bring it up to poke fun, but it's interesting that Jalen Suggs is going to be featured very much in this matchup with the ball in his hands, initiating the offense. And that I thought was the game plan last week. Like, let him shoot. Like, if you have to, just put Anunoby on Franz, and whatever he gets, make him earn it. And if Jalen Suggs wants to take 20 shots and a bunch of threes, that's fine. And he went 0 of 8, 5 of 16 from the field. So I guess as far as the shooting is concerned, let's just start there. How concerned are you that that's eventually going to be like too much of an Achilles heel? I guess the follow-up would be, it's basically a KCP question, but like, who do you expect to eventually regress to being like a better shooter? Like even Suggs to an extent was around 40% last year. Like, is this an anomaly what we've seen so far? Or do you think this is here to stay? How poor the shooting numbers are?
I mean, like I said, I've been doing a lot of coping recently when it comes to my sports teams. I feel like I've been coping throughout this, first quarter plus of the season with the Magic. Right now they're last in the league in 3-point percentage.
They are.
I went through the numbers a couple of weeks ago, and there were like 4 guys on the team that were shooting like career lows from 3, like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope included. And I think there were like 9 out of like 11 or 12 guys who had played at, significant points at any time in the season, and 9 of the 12 guys were shooting worse than they did last year. So at some point you have to believe that that's going to sort of regress back to the mean. And this team is by no means going to be an incredible 3-point shooting team. But if at some point we can just sort of throw out the first 25 games and, maybe over the next 25 games, they're 35% from behind the arc, I would expect that at some point in the season. Just like going off of a lot of these guys' history, like Gary Harris wasn't shooting the ball necessarily well to start the year. Jonathan Isaac has been down. We talked about Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Wendell Carter Jr. hasn't been able to hit threes. Who else? Franz obviously was shooting the ball a bit better. Jalen Suggs has really struggled as well. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to me is like the first obvious one that he's getting good looks, and he has started to shoot the ball a little bit better as of late. There's still probably too many games, I would say, that you just come away from that like feeling like, at this point, you're the 2-time champion on this team. You were brought in for your veteran presence. We just need more out of you. Like you can't have a game where you have 6 shot attempts, and 2 of those are threes, right? Like if you're having 6 shot attempts, 4 or 5 of those have to be from 3. You just have to find a way to get more volume there.
Right.
With Jalen, I think it's more so like had Paolo Banchero for the first 5 games, he goes down, and now all of a sudden Jalen's expected to be the secondary option. And now Franz goes down and Jalen is the primary option, which, hey, I watched the, Sam Bassini's game theory pod that came out yesterday all about Jalen Suggs. And he hit everything like right on the head. Like he's not a number one guy, but right now he's being asked to do that because the Magic just don't really have any other options. And there are some games where Jalen gets sped up and looks terrible, that Knicks game included. But then there are some games like the last one that we had against Milwaukee, while maybe they didn't win that game, he just played with a lot more patience and a lot better pace and looked a lot better. So in my opinion, yeah, we should sort of get back to at least being halfway decent, in terms of percentage. Yeah, it has been a nightmare early on, though, watching this team. And not only is that the Knicks game plan, and it's going to be their game plan on Sunday, that is pretty much every team's game plan is like, hey, Franz or early in the season, like these guys are sort of going to get theirs. We need to wall up and double and even triple those guys when we need to. And we're just going to make everybody else try to beat us. And some teams have had success with that. But to the Magic's credit, they've been the best team in the fourth quarter this year in terms of net rating. If it's a close game and you're heading into the last 12 minutes, I really like our odds because the Magic are going to have this like 6-7 minute stretch where you're just going to really struggle to score the ball. And they just find a way to make plays and knock down shots when it matters. How much are they going to be able to sustain that without having that offense from Franz and from Paolo at this point? I really don't know. We're going to find that out pretty shortly here. And this is the point of the season where you talked about last year without OG and without Randall, where we're just asking these guys to hold on, the best that they can. And you're hoping that by the time Paolo gets back, you're not lower than the 4 or maybe the 5 seed. And maybe you can go on a little bit of a run and get back to, the 4 or the 3 seed. But time's going to tell. I would be lying if I told you I'm super fired up about our matchup on Sunday.
Same, which is funny because look, this is a good transition into talking about the Knicks. They're 6th in net rating as of right now, second best offense in the league. Going into Wednesday's game, best offense in the league, second best offensive rating of all time. They're second in true shooting. They're second in effective field goal percentage. First or second in 3-point percentage, first in free throw percentage. This team gets buckets, and what a difference a third quarter makes, where the Hawks just turned off the Knicks' water. And I think, John, like the way that they beat them in the fourth, Juan, the way the Knicks were beaten in the fourth, they just they give up 22 offensive rebounds. And if I could take a temperature check of the fan base, which might not always speak to ration, but I also think there is something to how they've felt about this team. Like that used to be us. Like last year, we were the team. Last 2 years, we were the team that won the possession battle, that would take your heart. You played defense for 24 seconds. Here's another 14. Like Josh Hart comes out of nowhere because you're doubling Isaiah Hartenstein or Mitchell Robinson. And that was being done to us the other night. So there was almost an identity question. Now, all the numbers that I mentioned that are great. They're starting 5 offensive or net rating. They play the most number of possessions according to Cleaning the Glass, but it's like plus 7.8. So there's like a decent sample size of them outscoring teams by bunches. And yet the vibes could not be more in reverse. I don't know if you saw the comments from Hartenstein today. That for when you're listening to this on Friday night, where he was asked about the Trae Young dice roll, and he was like, "Yeah, I wouldn't let that happen." And there is a hint of that with some fans here. And the guys on Casual Friday said this again when you're listening to this on Friday, that there's a hint of losing Dante, losing Hartenstein, that FU that came from the team last year, that attitude that very much spoke to New York, but this team doesn't necessarily have that. They're more talented. They're a better team. They probably have a higher ceiling, but they cashed in their chips and that fun team that we saw last year for a contender. And they're not contenders. They're just better than last year. And so my question for you, who just saw this Knicks team, again, not trying to poke the bear here.
We're friends here. Everything, this is totally fine.
Well, they blew him off the court last Tuesday.
Yeah,
and I gotta be honest, I went into that game thinking, I think the Magic got this because of what they can do defensively. And this is like a good test if the Knicks can, get their offense going against a high powered defense. And when they're up by 36 in the fourth, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a statement win. Like that's a really good team that's won 12-13. And it's all been erased by a third quarter against the Hawks. So I don't know if you want to therapize Knicks fans listening to this, be like, no, your team's still good. Trust me, we saw it firsthand. Your team is still very good. Or if you want to just give me your honest thoughts, like here's what I'll do. The question you asked me before the season, how afraid am I of the Magic? How afraid of you are the New York Knicks in a 7-game series now?
It's one of the matchups that I like. It's right below the Celtics for me. I think that's still the number one team that I would like to avoid. But right behind them are the New York Knicks, really just because like some of the last couple of matchups that we've had where you all have just been able to really shut our water off. And especially this last matchup, I do think there was, a bit of coming away from that of like, yeah, we really didn't play well, but they just were hitting everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you come away from that game feeling a bit like that. But for me, when you all made the Mikal Bridges trade and it looked like it was just going to be like the Nova Knicks, right? I thought it was really interesting. So I was like, man, if they're not really shaking up too much of that team and they're just adding Mikal Bridges, like that really makes them dangerous right out of the gate. But then obviously like you make the big move for Cat and obviously or Big Purr, and that raises the ceiling. But to me, it was like, okay, that's going to take a little bit of time for that, like cohesion for them to really be able to find that. And from the outside perspective, that's kind of what I'm seeing, right? Is like, it's only 27 games. Obviously they've figured things out offensively. You guys have been winning like crazy as of late after the sort of like so-so start. But that's kind of where I'm like, the Knicks, they're still really figuring things out. At least that's what it seems like from the outside. Like if I was a Knicks fan, I don't know that I would be hitting any type of like panic button. Like it's the course of an NBA season. You're going to win a couple of games. You're going to feel like you're never going to lose again. And then you're going to lose a couple of games and feel like you're never going to win again. That's just the nature of an NBA season. But for me, like I'm more interested in like once you all get like fully healthy, have all of your guys. Obviously, I just don't think that you're going to be able to replace like the edge and the grit like you talked about that guys like Dante and iHeart had. But it's just like when you guys are clicking offensively, it doesn't seem like there's going to be anything that even some of the best defensive teams in the league can do, right? Like we pride Wendell Carter Jr. on his defense and his versatility. And Karl-Anthony Towns just made it seem like the dude didn't exist. Like he wasn't on the floor. He wasn't seeing anybody. So yeah, that's my perspective, is that it's obviously taking this Knicks team some time to get things together. But I would be lying if I wasn't watching that game the other night against Atlanta and saying like, where the hell was this team last week? Right.
They're missing. Yeah.
And it's like, well, they just played like this against Atlanta. We're not going to get that team on Sunday. They're going to be ready to bounce back and make another statement win. The Magic haven't lost at home this year. So the Knicks are saying, hey, this is a team that plays really well at home. Maybe, yeah, sure, we just lost to this Atlanta team. We got bounced from the NBA Cup. We have a chance to make another statement win here and beat the last unbeaten team at home in the league this year. So
there's actually a bit of a come to Jesus moment on Sunday where one or the other is going to happen as far as extremes go. Either the Magic are going to lose their first home game, or for just the second time with OG Anunoby in the lineup, the Knicks are going to lose a second consecutive game. They've only lost back-to-back games with OG in the lineup once, and it was to go from 4-3 to 4-5. They lost to Houston and Atlanta earlier this year. But that speaks so much to the how invested emotionally Knicks fans seem to be in, not necessarily in this team yet, but in we really started to follow the Knicks and believe in this team, and you've given me this. And if they lose on Sunday to a Magic team missing their two best players,
yeah, I could see how that's rough.
If the sky wasn't already falling after Wednesday's embarrassment to the Hawks, it's now just going to be a full monsoon of clouds coming out of the sky. I don't even know how to preview the game on Jalen's going to guard Brunson. I don't know how much they're going to switch if Goga plays, but I think they should. And I think the Knicks are going to, like you said, they're going to wall up. They're going to play their drop. And if the Magic hit their threes, then this will be a game. And if the Knicks are hitting shots like they were, then maybe this isn't as much of a game. But so let me ask this: how much is the fan base like invested in keeping this undefeated at home thing at least going?
I mean, I don't. Obviously, like you never want to lose any game. You never want to lose a home game. Like the Magic haven't lost a home game like dating back to March of this year, right? Like they ended the year really strong. Obviously, they went to 7 with Cleveland, with each of those teams in that series winning their home games. We haven't lost one this year. So, 9 plus or almost 9 months now without a loss at home. Obviously, you don't want to, but I think everybody's has realistic expectations in terms of where this team is at right now and the stretch of games that we have coming up. Like I said, we're kind of just at the point in time where we want to survive, until Paolo gets back, and then hopefully Franz is back, in the next month or so. But we've got the Knicks on Sunday, and then Magic have 3 days off, and then they play Oklahoma City on TNT on Thursday. And part of what stung about that loss to the Knicks is that we've been clamoring the last couple of years, like this team needs more attention. They deserve to be on national TV. And then every time they get on national TV, they get spanked like they did, in Madison Square Garden. So that added a little bit of, insult to injury. But yeah, I would be lying if we weren't thinking about that. But again, I think we're at the point of the season where everybody realizes that we are going to have some losses here with both of those guys out. But I think more than anything, we just want the team to play with that energy, to play with passion. They always play really well, in front of the home crowd. And we just want it to be a competitive game. The loss, to Milwaukee Tuesday night was really tough because nobody expected that game to be close, myself included. And then they just played so hard, made a lot of plays. Jalen was incredible in that fourth quarter. And then you're just not able to get the win. To me, those types of losses always hurt a little bit more than the blowouts. But at the end of the day, I think we just want a competitive game. And we believe that if the Magic are in enough games, they're just going to find ways to win. Like Jamal Mosley, in my opinion, isn't getting nearly enough credit for the job that he's done this year. Definitely, no lower than 2 or 3 in the Coach of the Year conversation, if you ask me. And he just does such a great job of keeping these guys motivated, keeping them together, keeping them bought in. So I expect it to be a more competitive game than what we saw last week. With the Magic being at home and sort of like an uncharacteristic defensive performance, it would be great to get a win. I can't lie.
So 2 things. First of all, what you just said about like a tough loss where it ends up being like a moral victory, and we enjoyed how tough the guys played and how gritty they were, and they were competitive all the way down to the end of the game. And unfortunately they lost, but we're still proud of this team. I missed that feeling. That was us the majority of last year, that when we were shorthanded, they played teams tough, and then sometimes they'd fall short, sometimes they end up winning. And it was, oh my gosh, like I'm just proud of this team for continuing to fight regardless of the circumstances. And I think that's the fan base is hearing a lot of that now.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Talk enough about how like expectations with your sports teams are really awesome, but changes they everything. Are also a thief of joy. Like things that you used to be able to celebrate, like you're like, no, we're past celebrating those types of small wins. And last year, we had like regular season wins that felt like the greatest thing that has happened in 10 years. And now you have a great win and you're like, okay, that was awesome. Now we're kind of on to the next thing. Where the measuring stick is now how well you do in the postseason. So It's awesome to go into a season like being excited about that kind of stuff, especially, in the position that your roster is in. But it also just robs you of being able to celebrate small things along the way, I think.
And like to the second thing where I asked about the home record, where you guys are 12-0 at home, 10-0 at home so far. So you also hinted at their upcoming homestand, their schedule so far. And when I talked to Kevin last week, they were in the midst of the weirdest road trip I had ever seen. New York, there was Brooklyn, the Knicks, Philly. And since then, they obviously played Phoenix at home, then went to Milwaukee for the tournament. But this Knicks game adds another home game to what is, I believe, going to be a 6-game homestand, where they play the Knicks, OKC, Miami, Boston, Miami, and then the Knicks and Brooklyn coming to town.
I think it's
so 7. It's 7 total. Yeah. 7 total. I'll just say this: if when the Knicks come back on December 27th, they're like 17-0 at home still, then Jamal Mosley overtakes Kenny Atkinson in Cleveland for Coach of the Year, because if you're missing your two best players and you keep this home undefeated stretch at intact still, then something's going on, because you will have beaten the two best teams in the NBA in OKC and Boston throughout this stretch. But obviously, as a Knicks fan who just would love for the vibes to return in some way, shape, or form, I'm hoping it ends on Sunday. But we'll see what happens. I usually at this point turn it over to our live chat, but we're pre-recording this, so there is no live chat. I will ask two questions that I always get during those live sessions, though. And I guess the first one is going to be about the transactional nature. Like, what are you looking for? This team has assets. Is anybody on this team that you consider potentially on the move or expendable? Who's untouchable? Like, what are you thinking from a transactional standpoint this team might do at the deadline?
So there are a couple of guys who, for the next month or so at least, are still going to be untouchable, just from the stand that they can't be traded just yet. I think Mo Wagner is in that. Jonathan Isaac until about January. Wendell Carter Jr. can't be traded at all this season due to him just signing the extension. Same for Jalen Suggs, although that's not a name that anybody would expect to come up in any type of trade conversations. I do think that if Wendell Carter Jr. had not signed the extension, just due to the way that Goga has really stepped up for the second consecutive year, when Wendell went out, he's looked incredible, in that starting unit. I think we'd be having a different conversation. But with this Magic front office, like if we go back to the 2022 draft, nobody had Paolo Banchero going number one until about 15 minutes before the draft started. Not nobody, but the vast majority of draft pundits did not have the Magic taking Paolo Banchero. So this front office just kind of always keeps you guessing. I always say you can't listen to what they say, but you have to listen to what they act on. So I personally would be pretty surprised if they made any sort of significant move. I think Gary Harris is a guy that potentially could be traded at the trade deadline, just because he's been a guy that, with all the injuries that we've had on a nightly basis, isn't really a guy that the Magic have really felt, or missed, I would say. With other guys like the rookie Tristan da Silva stepping up in a big way, I think he's earned some rotation minutes. So fully healthy, it kind of seems like, well, Tristan da Silva really should get Gary Harris's minutes moving forward. It just kind of makes the most sense. But I wouldn't expect the Magic to make any big deals, even though if they did, it would tell me that they really believe in the first 27 games, the way that this team has competed and the way that they've performed, and have talked themselves into, well, if we can get Paolo Banchero back, we can get Franz back, we may just be one more, rotation piece away from really being able to make like an Eastern Conference Finals, or maybe they're crazy enough to talk themselves into a finals run. I really don't know. I think it's a bit early for that. So that's why I would be surprised. But if they did make a move, it would tell me that they are all the way bought in on this. But I'm always more so of the thinking that like Paolo and Franz are still, 22 and 23 years old. These guys are 4 or 5 years away from their prime. And when you make that sort of all-in move, sure, it raises your ceiling, but potentially can like shorten your window. So if you're going to go all in, you have to go all in on like the very best version of these guys. So I don't think it's time to do that. And again, I just don't see them making any big moves here.
And then just as far as expectations for the rest of the season, obviously, like you want to see what they look like when Paolo and Franz get back. But like, what does a disappointing season look like to you? Is there playoff parameters on that? Like if they if they get out of the second round, it's gravy. If they just make it, it's gravy. What does a disappointing season look like for you?
Yeah, I think where I'm at is like, I feel like we're in the top 4. I feel like we're solidly in the top 4. Like even, when I look at some of these other teams, like at what you might consider their best, but like Cleveland and Boston, I feel like those are going to be the two teams more than likely, more so just because of the start that Cleveland got off to, and like sort of the cushion that they were able to create for themselves. I don't know that I buy into them like really truly being contenders. I just, as someone who saw them for 7 games last year in that first round series, I'm just not totally bought in on them. Maybe I'll be proven wrong on that, but obviously Boston, Cleveland, New York, the Magic, like I expect the Magic to be competing for the 3 or the 4 seed when we get everybody back. So I'd be a little bit disappointed, with a regular season finish if we don't have home court advantage. And then it really comes down to matchups, obviously. But if you finish that high, right, like I just don't want to see a 4-5 matchup of the Magic and the Knicks. That's where I'm at right now. Give me almost anybody else, and I'd be happy. Like, I don't think Cleveland's going to be in a 4-5. The Celtics aren't going to be in a 4-5. I don't think the Magic and the Knicks are going to be in a 4-5 either, but I just would not want to see the Knicks in a first round playoff series. I think pretty much any other team that they could match up with, I'd like to favor them, and I would see them advancing to the second round. And, if you get to the second round, I do feel like that's the successful season. You've taken another step forward, as long as you don't get swept in the second round. Like, if that's competitive, especially if you're pushing that to 6 or 7 games, I'd be happy with that.
It sounds like you'd be okay with a 3-6 or a 4-5. That is anybody but the Knicks. Like, if it's you guys against Atlanta, you'd be okay with it.
Atlanta, Miami, Milwaukee,
wow.
Indiana. Like, I'd be pretty confident. I mean, this Bucks team, I wasn't super high on them coming into the season. I know they started to figure things out recently. I just think I like the way that the Magic match up with Milwaukee. And I really believe in our young guys and just the amount of depth that we have. Everyone knows that's a big strength of the Magic, but I want all the smoke pretty much at this point. I need to see some better performances against this Knicks team. That might sound like, I want to duck the Knicks or whatever. Maybe I do. Who knows? But the last couple of performances haven't inspired a ton of confidence against that New York team. And it just feels like a bad matchup for us as these rosters currently stand.
I'll say this. As a Knicks fan, hearing that, I would obviously pick the Knicks to win that series. I'm not as confident as I was before the season, obviously, but
that you guys could have a couple week stretch where that completely changes, right? Like, like we've talked about, if everything starts to click for that team and you all look the way that you envisioned this team when you made those trades, like if you're able to realize that, you'll feel differently.
Well, so what I more mean is like, it's not necessarily a Knicks thing. It's more, as long as Orlando is still struggling from deep, then I actually do like trust the Knicks in that series. The Atlanta thing is so specifically a bad matchup because Dyson Daniels can turn the Knicks water off. But specifically like the head of the snake with Jalen Brunson, I was very disappointed Tibbs didn't like attack Trey as much as he did. And then there's of course the Mikal Bridges thing where you just eventually he's just going to have to play better from a defensive
that's
standpoint.
What I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah,
like,
please.
Where are you? Because from an outside perspective, again, it's like, okay, he's figured it out. And then he's sort of back to, playing below expectations. How do you all feel about Mikal so far?
So even in his best stretches where he has played well, he had actually just before the Hawks game come off a 5-game stretch where he was like shooting 50, 40, 90, like he was getting to the line, but more aggressive, hitting his threes, hit 5 big threes, maybe even 6 big threes against Toronto on Monday. And then like had an off shooting night, but like his 5 best stretches were always offensive. And yet Cade was still cooking him for most of the night. And like we saw what Trae Young did in the point of attack on Wednesday. And like, even RJ Barrett just like bully balled him, getting downhill as much as he could, especially when they were in transition. And it just wasn't what they needed. And I had this really long conversation. You shouted him out with Sam Vecini on Game Theory on Thursday. And as much as I tried to deflect from how much of why they lost on Wednesday was because of his defense, like they lost because they scored 100 points. Like you're that high powered in offense. If you only give up 108, like the ironic thing was the focus being about their defense, and their defensive rating has now gone up to 16th. Like they're actually very close to where like a lot of us were saying, like just get to middle of the pack and you'll be fine. They might actually have a shot at like top 13, top 12. But as far as the blueprint is concerned, that's the Mikal Bridges conversation, because you can build a very good team if this is what he is, that wins a lot of regular season games as his high-powered offense and a mid defense. You're not a championship contender if this is him. And it's why so much is riding on him figuring it out, or the Knicks figuring out how to just move on from the fact that they gave up 5 picks, 2 swaps for him. So it's 25 games. There's a lot of time left. Like, it's not even like just the rest of this season. Like, there's years that they're going to be able to try and figure this out. The early returns are not inspiring confidence. And so we'll see if that changes against Orlando. I very much. I know for you, I hope
he's
not.
absolutely killed us in the past. So, with those Brooklyn teams for sure.
Yeah. Well, it'd be lying if I said I wasn't hoping. See, I don't even want him to go off like offensively. If he like has a game where I'm guessing he's going to be guarding Jalen Suggs. And if Suggs is in jail for the night, I'll be like, oh my gosh, like Mikal Bridges, this is what I've been wanting. Like one night where the other team, their best player has their water shut off, which I've been using that analogy because it's just so perfect to what Dyson Daniels did to Jalen Brunson on Wednesday. And the Hawks got back a first round pick for Dyson Daniels. The Knicks gave up 5. Like it will not go away from them what they gave up for this guy. And now the national conversation after the only game that was watched at the time on Wednesday was that Knicks Hawks game is going to be around that and what that trade is. So again, it's early returns, but it's not the best returns so far. And yet they're 15-10 and the sky really is not falling, as you said earlier. There's a lot of great things about this team. Karl-Anthony Towns has been a revelation, and that toughness we were talking about that may be lacking, I'm finding it in Karl-Anthony Towns, which is amazing to where the conversation started with him when he first came to New York, So.
I do. No, he's been great to watch. And like I said, I'm confident that you all will figure it out at some point. There's just too much talent there. Obviously, we all know what Tibbs is capable of, and it's just a matter of time. And I'm just hoping that you don't figure it out on Sunday.
I was gonna say, you hope we figure it out Wednesday, is what you're saying. Next Wednesday. Well, what I figured out a lot over the last couple of years is how much I enjoy the 6-Man Show crew, and every time we get together to talk about our basketball teams. I know it would suck from a matchup standpoint for you because you don't want to see it, but I would love for a matchup in the playoffs where you and me and Kevin and we get to just go back and forth a little bit over the 7 games. But in the meantime, I will just say this: Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. The next time I'll talk to one of you is right after Christmas when they played each other on the 27th. But in the meantime, I wish you and the 6-Man Show crew and all your families the best of luck, except on Sunday in this matchup. And before you get out of here, Jonathan, please let the fine folks at home know where they can find you and all your stuff.
Well, the feeling is very much mutual. There's definitely a mutual level of respect and love between the Blue Wire pods here. Appreciate everything that you guys do. Appreciate you always being gracious and sharing your platform with us. But yeah, if you're looking for Magic coverage, you can find us at 6-Man Show everywhere, that you find your social media, obviously all podcast platforms, YouTube, all that good stuff. And yeah, wish you all nothing but the best as he is just sporting that Mets hat there. We're going to wrap this one up, but yeah. Always appreciate you having me, man. It's all love all the way around. Love what you guys do. And yeah, Merry Christmas to you. Happy holidays to all the Knicks fans and all the Yankees fans out there. And yeah, man, appreciate this.
Indeed. Juan, as always, it's good to talk to you. And we'll be seeing each other soon.
I'm getting out of here, man.
Of course. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. If you dug it, please head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. If you're watching on YouTube, like the video, remember to subscribe. About 1,300 away from 20K. So help us on the road to 20K. We'd greatly appreciate it. I'll be back on Thursday. Fun matchup there against Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, and the Minnesota Timberwolves in Cat's return home to Minnesota. I should say to his old home in Minnesota. But until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight, and I'll speak with you soon.